Joining us now is KT McFarland. She is a national security analyst and host of FoxNews.com's DEFCON 3 show, which can be seen at 1 p.m. on Wednesdays at live.foxnews.com. KT, a really great day to have you because there's so much going on in the world. We're going to get to Egypt. We're going to get to what's happening in Syria, but I want to start by the information that came out yesterday that 4 State Department officials who were put on leave while they investigated the Benghazi matter have been basically reinstated. No harm, no foul. Come on back to work. Oh, you might have to change your job title and your job description a little bit, but we can't find that you really did anything wrong. What's your thought about that? It's
outrageous, and it's not only symptomatic of this administration, but probably American society in general. Nobody's responsible for anything. Initially, the Benghazi story and who was going to be held responsible? Nobody at the top, right? Nobody at the senior levels. It was going to be a couple of mid-level officials. But now it turns out we're not even holding them responsible. But it's not just Benghazi that's outrageous. It's the whole notion of accountability. Nobody's held responsible for anything. Nobody's punished for anything. Nobody's punished or held responsible for NSA. Nobody's held responsible for the IRS harassment. Nobody's held responsible for the FBI wiretapping journalists. It's sort of this. It all just sort of disappears in this vast muck and morass of hoping that people will just get bored and look the other way and go on to some news scandal.
And in fact, these mid-level people who are being told you can come back, at least they get to come back. They got 10 months, by the way, off with pay.
That's nice.
But the senior people who were sort of surrounding this whole thing, I think to a person, they've all been promoted.
What makes me the maddest about this is not that government officials and politicians lie, cheat, and steal. You kind of expect that. It's that the mainstream media, that the White House press corps has refused to look into this in any deep way. They've let them off the hook. They have been willing co-conspirators in this charade to the American people, saying, no, don't look here. There's no big problem here. I particularly think of, here we are at the 40th anniversary of Watergate. What happened 40 years ago? Dogged reporters followed the trail, never gave up. Now what happens? The dogged reporters, they go on to the next cocktail party with the other administration officials.
Yeah. KT McFarland is our guest. And KT, Egypt, I don't know where to begin with Egypt. The latest news over the last couple of days is the Egyptian military has taken into custody the head of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
They are saying that they are going to release Hosni Mubarak from prison. And there have been the Muslim Brotherhood activists on the ground there are torching churches and helping tear them down, Christian churches. A lot of, and also silently, we hear that the American government, the Obama administration, is starting to hold back on some of the military aid that we are obligated to give Egypt because of the Camp David Accords. At this point, is there anything the Obama administration can do about Egypt, or should they just sort of step back and let it play out its course?
At this point, I think they ought to, whatever their initial instincts are, take a deep breath and do exactly the opposite. Because for the last
It's the George Costanza approach to foreign policy.
Exactly. Because for the last 2 years, Egypt has had 3 governments, each one of which we enthusiastically welcomed and supported until we pulled out the rug from under them. And now we've gotten to the point where everybody's mad at us. Nobody trusts us. Our allies, they don't believe it, trust us, and our enemies and adversaries, they don't believe anything we say either. So there's, again, no accountability. I think at this point, what Egypt needs more than anything is to restore its economy. And it can't do that unless there is order and stability and people aren't rioting in the streets. Because the choice is long past this idea between you have a military dictatorship on one hand, and on the other hand, you have the Google generation leading a secular democracy in Egypt. At this point, it's just a matter of getting order in the streets, and I say that the government probably has a month to do it.
Yeah.
And if they fail, then you could potentially see a generation. You could see Syria in the making in Egypt as Al-Qaeda establishes itself in the Sinai Peninsula and jihadists come to fight.
But KT, isn't part of the problem here, order in the streets goes against the romantic, triumphant narrative that the president sort of championed for the last year about the Arab Spring. He backed the protesters in Egypt because he romanticized the idea of this Arab Spring and that it was going to change things. Order in the streets means quell the Arab Spring, put the military back in power in Egypt so that the economy can get built up. Isn't the president too invested in the idea of the Arab Spring and the protesters in the streets?
Well, I think the American left is still thinking it's the good old anti-war days and let's go occupy the president's office at Columbia University. So yes, they have this romantic notion, which is not reality. But I think, frankly, the far right is just as guilty of it. The neocons and President Bush, they're just as guilty as saying, "Oh, democracy is going to solve everybody's problems." Democracy is not just one man, one vote, one time. Democracy is an entire society that builds up with democratic institutions and respect for minority rights. And Egypt has shown, whether it's been under the Muslim Brotherhood, that it's not willing to do that at this point. So I'm looking at a humanitarian disaster in Egypt, not a political disaster, because if Egypt doesn't get 12, 13, 14 billion dollars of gift every year from somebody, the Egyptian people starve. 40% of that population has no food other than the government subsidized wheat. It has the largest youth unemployment rate in the world. Right. And yet 70% of the population is youth, is under the age of 30. So I think it's establish order in the streets, get the economy going again, get tourists back, get foreign investment back, keep the Suez Canal and the rents that it gives the Egyptian government, keep that open, because if not, angry people go to Tahrir Square because they protest their political disadvantages.
Right.
What happens if they're hungry?
Real quick, Syria, there are reports in the last few minutes that perhaps chemical weapons have been used against the opposition. No way to independently verify, but we are starting to see pictures and images that suggest that may well be an accurate report. Your thoughts?
If you're watching your two enemies kill each other, do not stand up and try to stop them. At this point, it's the chemical weapons touting murderous Assad government dictatorship on the one hand, and it's the Al-Qaeda-led rebels on the other.
Yeah, okay. KT McFarland, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate it.